Shocking news that Triple H dropped about Paul Heyman's injury is devastating. Triple H just said something about Paul Heyman that nobody in WWE expected him to say out loud. And the specific way he said it, the specific context in which the information was delivered, the specific weight that Triple H's voice carried when the words came out, the specific quality of what was visible in the room when the information landed tells you that this is not a storyline development. This is not a worked shoot segment designed to generate conversation. This is not any of the categories that professional wrestling storytelling conventions make available for processing news that arrives this way. Paul Heyman is injured. Seriously. The news that Triple H dropped is the right word because it did not arrive through the managed, scheduled, announcement-formatted communication that WWE uses for news it is prepared to share is devastating in a way that the wrestling community is still absorbing. In a way that makes the WrestleMania 42 landscape, already the most complicated and most emotionally loaded WrestleMania build in years, significantly more uncertain at its most critical point. But here is what needs to be understood before anything else. Before the analysis of what this means for Roman Reigns. Before the analysis of what it means for the programs Paul Heyman's presence has been shaping, before the WrestleMania implications and the talent impact and all of the professional wrestling machinery that this news immediately affects, before any of that, Paul Heyman is a person, one of the most remarkable people professional wrestling has produced in its entire history. A man whose contribution to this industry as a promoter, as a manager, as a producer, as a creative mind, as a verbal artist, as someone who has spent decades making professional wrestling better than it would have been without him is so foundational and so specific and so irreplaceable that the wrestling world cannot casually absorb news about his physical condition as simply another roster management update. This is not a roster update. This is news about a human being who matters. And this video is going to honor both of those dimensions, the human dimension and the professional dimension, with the full seriousness they each deserve. Everything else starts here. Let's go through exactly what Triple H communicated about Paul Heyman's injury because the specific content of what was said and the specific manner in which it was delivered are both important pieces of information that the wrestling world needs to engage with directly rather than through the filtered, secondhand summaries that the coverage is currently providing. Triple H's communication about Paul Heyman came in a context that was not designed to be the vehicle for this news. Whatever the original purpose of the interaction or appearance in which the information was shared, whatever agenda Triple H was there to address or subject he had been asked to speak about the Heyman injury information arrived within it in a way that suggested it was not the prepared talking point of someone delivering scheduled news but the unavoidable acknowledgement of someone whose position requires them to address a reality that the people they are speaking to deserve to know about. The specific words Triple H used are being analyzed across every wrestling community right now with the close reading that significant statements from people in positions of institutional authority receive. Every word choice, every pause, every modifier and qualifier, and the specific things that were said and the specific things that were not said, the negative space of what Triple H chose not to include in his communication about Heyman is as informative as what he did include. What was communicated is that Paul Heyman's injury is serious, that the severity of it has created an uncertainty about his availability and his capacity that extends to the most imminent programming on WWE's calendar. That the people within WWE who are aware of the situation, who have the specific, close-access information about what the injury is and what it means in terms of timeline and impact, are treating it with the seriousness that Triple H's communication suggested they are treating it with. What was not communicated, what Triple H chose, with the specific care that people in his position bring to what they confirm and what they leave open, is the definitive statement about what this means for WrestleMania 42. The specific absence of that definitive statement is itself a piece of information. It means the definitive answer is not yet available. That the situation is still developing. That what Paul Heyman's injury means for the most important event of the wrestling calendar year is genuinely uncertain at the moment that the wrestling world most needs certainty. That uncertainty, delivered through Triple H's communication about a person and a situation that the wrestling community has deep investment in, is the most devastating element of what was shared. I want to take real time, more time than wrestling coverage typically takes, for this to talk about who Paul Heyman is. Not Paul Heyman the Wiseman, the character. Not Paul Heyman the special counsel, the on-screen role. Not Paul Heyman the promotional asset, the performer, the television personality. The person. Paul Heyman has been in professional wrestling for longer than most people watching this video have been alive. He arrived in this industry as a young man with specific ideas about what professional wrestling could be if the people controlling it were willing to pursue those ideas with the commitment they required. He built things. ECW is the most famous thing. He built the company that changed how professional wrestling understood itself, that proved the audience was ready for something that the existing structures were not providing, that produced talent and moments and a culture of fan investment that the broader industry absorbed and built upon even after the specific company ceased to exist. He has been, throughout his career, the most persuasive human being professional wrestling has produced. Not the most theatrical or the most flamboyant or the most conventionally entertaining in the variety show sense that the medium sometimes demands of its verbal performers. The most persuasive. The man who can take any argument for any performer, in any character position, against any opponent and construct the version of that argument that is simultaneously most entertaining, most emotionally resonant, and most logically coherent. The man whose words have made champions seem more like champions and made challengers seem more dangerous and made every program he has been attached to seem more significant than it was before his attachment to it. The current era, the Roman Reigns bloodline era that has been the defining narrative of modern WWE, was shaped by Paul Heyman's verbal and conceptual investment in Roman Reigns' character at a pivotal moment. The specific relationship between Paul Heyman as the special counsel and Roman Reigns as the tribal chief is one of the most dramatically rich partnerships professional wrestling has produced in the modern era. Its complications, its history, its fractures, and the questions that Roman's 2026 return and the Heyman situation have raised about what their relationship actually is, all of that is irreplaceable content that no other performer or character can provide. Paul Heyman being injured is not a roster management problem. It is the temporary absence of something that was not interchangeable to begin with. And the wrestling community that has watched what Paul Heyman has built across every era, in every context, carries this news with the specific weight of caring about something that cannot simply be replaced. The dimension of Paul Heyman's injury that the wrestling world's analysis is most immediately focused on, the competitive and narrative impact on Roman Reigns heading into WrestleMania 42, deserves honest, complete examination rather than either the catastrophizing that some coverage is producing or the premature reassurance that other coverage is offering. Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman's relationship has been one of the most layered in professional wrestling's recent history. The Wiseman's role in the Bloodline era went beyond the conventional manager-client dynamic that the special counsel title formally describes. Heyman has been the voice of the tribal chief's authority, the verbal expression of everything Roman's character represents, the specific intelligence that communicates the bloodline's power in the verbal register that Roman's physical dominance communicates in the physical register. Without that voice, or with that voice operating under the constraints that serious injury imposes on its availability and its effectiveness, Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 42 is navigating the most significant match of his WrestleMania season without the specific resource that the Bloodline era has always had available. This is not an argument that Roman Reigns is less formidable as a competitor without Paul Heyman's verbal support. Roman Reigns' individual competitive capacity is not contingent on Heyman's availability. The tribal chief is what he is regardless of whether the Wiseman is present to describe what he is. But the specific, irreplaceable dimension of what the Roman-Heyman partnership provides, the specific quality of having the most persuasive man in professional wrestling constructing the narrative context of every Roman Reigns moment in real time, is a dimension that the WrestleMania 42 program loses access to if Heyman's injury prevents his full participation. And CM Punk, whose WrestleMania 42 program against Roman Reigns has always been partly about the verbal dimension, who has been conducting a months-long psychological campaign that Heyman's specific brand of verbal counter would be best positioned to address, enters WrestleMania with whatever advantage the Heyman situation creates on the verbal side of the program. This is not a comfortable development for the Bloodline's WrestleMania preparation, and it is not a comfortable situation for anyone who cares about Paul Heyman the person. Here is what the Heyman injury news does to the WrestleMania 42 picture that goes beyond the immediate competitive and narrative implications we have been discussing. It introduces genuine human uncertainty into a moment that the wrestling world approaches with the specific, constructed, anticipated certainty of someone who knows that a big event is coming and who has been managing their emotional investment in preparation for it. WrestleMania is the destination. Every program, every match, every character development across the entire first quarter of the wrestling year has been pointed toward this event. The audience's engagement with WWE programming, their willingness to invest emotionally in the stories being told, to carry the investment through the difficult weeks and the delayed payoffs and the frustrating mid-build moments, is sustained by the understanding that the destination exists and that the destination will deliver on the investment. Paul Heyman's injury introduces the specific uncertainty of not knowing whether a significant participant in the WrestleMania story will be present in the capacity that the story assumed. Whether the version of WrestleMania 42 that the wrestling world has been preparing to receive is the version that is actually going to be delivered. Whether the complete picture, with all its planned components functioning as planned, is what the grandest stage will provide. That uncertainty, at this specific point in the calendar, is devastating in the specific way of learning close to an important event that something important might be different from what you expected. Not necessarily worse. Genuinely different. And different at WrestleMania, when the expectation management for the event has been running for months, is itself the experience of loss, even if the different version turns out to be something extraordinary. The wrestling community's reaction to Triple H's news about Heyman is not disproportionate. It is the exact response of people who understand what Paul Heyman's presence in the WrestleMania 42 story represents and what his potential absence would cost. One more dimension of this story that deserves to be said clearly before the analysis fully transitions to WrestleMania implications. Paul Heyman's career has not been easy. It has not been characterized by the comfortable, institutionally supported trajectory that makes longevity in professional wrestling's most visible positions straightforward. He has built things and lost them, has been in positions of authority and had that authority removed, has rebuilt, has found new forms for his specific talent when the previous forms became unavailable. Paul Heyman's resilience is part of his professional identity in a way that his promotional genius sometimes overshadows in the conversations about what makes him significant. He has survived things in this industry that would have permanently ended careers of lesser durability. He has arrived at 2026 at the most prominent, most institutionally affirmed, most creatively significant position of his career as the Wiseman of the Bloodline era through a path that went through enough adversity to guarantee that the arrival is genuinely earned. That resilience, the specific quality of someone who has fought for their place in this industry in ways that the comfortable category of always been at the top cannot contain, is the most relevant quality in Paul Heyman's story right now. Because whatever the specific nature of this injury and whatever the timeline it imposes and whatever the WrestleMania uncertainty it creates, the person navigating it is someone who has navigated harder things. Paul Heyman will be okay. Not on the timeline that WrestleMania season demands. Not necessarily in the form that the wrestling world hoped his WrestleMania 42 presence would take. But Paul Heyman will be okay. That is not optimism. It is the pattern recognition of someone who has watched Paul Heyman for long enough to know that his version of okay always arrives. Triple H dropped devastating news about Paul Heyman's injury. The wrestling world is absorbing the human dimension of it while also reckoning with the WrestleMania 42 implications. And this community, Wrestling News CC's community, is the place where both conversations deserve to happen at their most complete. I need every response in the comments. What does Paul Heyman's potential absence or limited availability mean for Roman Reigns at WrestleMania 42? Does it level the playing field with CM Punk, or does Roman's individual capacity override whatever the Heyman situation changes? What is the most important thing about Paul Heyman's career that you want to acknowledge in this moment, the contribution that matters most to you personally? And the question that sits at the center of this entire situation when Paul Heyman does come back, whenever that is, in whatever form it takes, what does his return moment look like and whose story does it most change? Drop every word. Share this video immediately with every wrestling fan in your world, because the news about Paul Heyman deserves the wrestling community's fullest possible engagement. Subscribe to Wrestling News CC and activate every notification, because when Paul Heyman's return arrives, and it will arrive, we will be the first to have the complete breakdown of what it means. Triple H said something about Paul Heyman that nobody expected to hear. It was devastating. But devastating is not the end of Paul Heyman's story. It never has been. And this community believes it never will be.